chain management professionals. I'm seeing that we have attendees still joining the webinar, so while we wait a few moments to allow them in, I would like, on behalf of the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, to sincerely thank our members and subscribers for their continued support, which makes it possible for us to deliver this type of cutting-edge content. For anyone interested in CSCMP membership or subscription information, additional details can be found on the cscmp.org website, along with a listing of upcoming webinars and events. Attendees on this webinar are muted for a better webinar experience, but we definitely would love for you to submit your questions throughout the broadcast using the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel. Also, please note that the rebroadcasting or retransmitting of this webinar is strictly prohibited without the proper authorization from CSCMP. With that out of the way, I would like to introduce our moderator for today's event, Jennifer Kobus, Vice President of Transportation at Ulta Beauty. Take it away, Jennifer.
Thanks, Nick. Good morning, everyone, or possibly good afternoon, depending on your time zone. I'm Jen Kobus. Welcome to Women Leaders Discussing Technology Trends in Supply Chain. I am Vice President of Transportation at Ulta Beauty, and I get to be the moderator today, which I am so pumped about that because we have three amazing panelists who are going to share their stories today. CSCMP launched this year a Transportation Center of Excellence, and this committee is really focused on four areas: professional development, modes of transportation, regulatory and legislative, and technology. Hint, hint, technology. That's what we're about today. As part of this committee, as well as chairing the technology pillar, I was super excited to partner with Project 44 to sponsor this amazing group of panelists. This is top talent, female leaders who are going to discuss technology trends in supply chain. Huge thank you to Project 44, again, for sponsoring this event. And with that, we're going to get started. So first, let me just introduce myself really quickly. Then we're going to introduce the rest of the panelists. Diane is from Project 44 and will share a few slides on technology trends, and then we're going to get into the meat of it, which is the Q&A piece of it, as well as any questions you might add in the chat function as Nick had just shared. So first off, Jen Kobus, 27 years in supply chain. I always hate saying that because it kind of ages me. I've been in about 10 years on the 3PL side and the last 17 years on the shipper side, and a variety of industries, automotive, food and beverage, and the last 5 years here in retail at Ulta Beauty. Initially came on as director and then moved to senior director and now recently vice president. So the retail bug definitely bit me, and I'm really excited to bring this group of panelists to this platform. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Shelley to introduce herself.
Thanks, Jennifer. So Shelley Simpson, Diane, Jennifer, I've been with the company 27 years also. Next week will be 28 years, but they all are with J.B. Hunt. And so I've had 3 jobs my whole life, one in high school, one in college, and one outside of college. And so I am responsible for the commercial strategies for the organization. So think all things revenue, which includes our technology space, and also responsible for all of our sales, marketing, customer experience, as well as our people and HR teams. And so that's something that I've recently inherited over the last 2 years and has been perfect to think about how we go to market from a commercial perspective, but also having our people front and center from that perspective. So thanks for having me.
Love it. Thank you, Shelley. Next, I'll turn it over to Kendra, if you could introduce yourself.
Hey. Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be in great company. I am definitely going to be, I think, maybe the transportation newbie on this panel. So I joined Truckstop in 2020 as our Chief Revenue Officer and have had a great run with the company. Today, I am the CEO of Truckstop. So if you don't know what our business does, we are a freight marketplace. We are trying to connect all of the carriers, particularly the small carrier, with brokers and shippers that have got goods to put in their trucks, and we use a lot of technology to make that happen. So it's great to be here.
Love it. Thank you, Kendra. And Diane, I'll turn it over to you now.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm also honored to be joining these women today. I am the Chief Customer Officer at Project 44. I've been with the company for about 13 months now, was new to supply chain when I joined, and it has been and will continue to be an amazing education every single day. As Jen said, I want to open our session today with just a little bit of context about how P44 and some thoughts from Gartner on how supply chains are transforming through the use of technology. Just spend a few minutes here to set some context for the questions that our panelists will be answering. Next slide, please. So Gartner asked chief supply chain officers about the importance or relevance of emerging technologies, and really 3 stood out. Big data provided by the Internet of Things, and then applying analytics and intelligence for transforming that data into information and insights. So this is really sort of findings from Gartner. If you go to the next slide. In the context of those findings, what P44 has done is identified particular technology themes that we're focused on as a technology vendor, and those are embedded AI and analytics, augmented data intelligence, the digital supply chain twin, and environmental and social government. For this conversation today, I'm just going to focus on a little bit on embedded AI and analytics, and then environmental and social government. Go to the next slide. Oh, there you already did. So we define embedded AI and analytics as software capabilities that deliver real-time reporting, interactive data visualization, or advanced analytics and intelligence. And this could be machine learning, predictive and prescriptive analytics that provide that directly into an enterprise business application. And so, what do I mean by this? When we think about this, in manufacturing, applying this would boost predictions and automation, such as for preventive asset management, lights out production, things like that. In customer service, you might see this applied as virtual customer assistance, VCA, or voice of the customer tools for informational exchange and improvement of the customer experience. In transportation, it might be for predicting the estimated arrival of a vessel at port or of a truck reaching its destination for delivery. Through 2024, what Gartner believes is that 50% of supply chain organizations will invest in applications that support AI and advanced analytics capabilities. So that's kind of theme 1 to keep in mind. The next theme is really about environmental social governance. You go to the next slide. Thank you. And this can be defined as corporate performance and evaluation measures that assess the robustness of a company's governance mechanisms related to environmental and social impact. So this is something that we're all talking about, very aware of. The way to think about how this shows up in different organizations is, one example is tools and solutions that map sourcing networks and tiers of suppliers to trace and locate the origins of products like palm oil or soy that are aligned to corporate objectives around reducing environmental impact, deforestation, things like that. So that's an example of where you can see this technology come into play. You can also imagine things like being used for risk assessment, visibility and collaboration tools, tracking and monitoring performance across outsourced manufacturing. So really looking at what's happening across each of those stages. So that's the kind of the second big theme to keep in mind, and something that P44 is certainly focused on. If you go to the last slide, I really just wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk about how, this isn't necessarily Project 44 projects, but how we're thinking about what supply chain leaders are most concerned about right now, both based on Gartner's findings as well as our own. And so it's just meant to give you a way to think about how people in our roles are thinking about what they're thinking about in their digital transformation journey. So I suspect that some of that resonated with the other people on the panel, and hopefully we'll get to hear more of their thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. I appreciate that. And I was blown away about the 50% of supply chain organizations investing in AI. And and when you talk about social governance, I think of like business continuity, and I'm sure when we talk about that with some of the questions with this panel, that those topics will come up as well. So really appreciate that very high level overview and pulling the Gartner assessments into that. So thank you. Okay, so we're going to jump into questions now, and we're going to kind of mix it up. So not necessarily, you don't have to feel like you have to answer every single question, but we'll kind of move it around and go from there. So the first question I would love all of our panelists to answer, which is, what do you see as the single biggest supply chain challenge that your company is facing, and how does technology play a role in that? And Kendra, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to have you start, if that's okay.
Sure. So for me, let me give some context then around my company. We, like I said, are a freight marketplace, and primarily we do a number of other things as well, but the core of our business is a freight marketplace. So bringing together all of the fragmented players that exist across the full truckload freight ecosystem. In particular, we serve quite a few, literally tens of thousands of really small trucking companies. So a small trucker guy, usually, and helping them get connected to brokers and or shippers that they might not already have relationships with. And then of course, vice versa. So giving the shippers and brokers, helping them get access to that small carrier. It's really hard to cut through the noise of all of the different carriers out there and figure out which ones might be the best to partner with you. So from my lens, I spend a lot of time looking at the challenge of matching capacity in this full truckload space. And one of the things that I see is a lot of the friction that exists in finding that capacity, whether you're on the broker or shipper side, or whether you're on the carrier side trying to basically sell your capacity. If you're a small carrier, it's hard to build new relationships. It's hard to establish that credibility from the get-go, be seen among all the other carriers. And then if you're a broker or shipper, sometimes it's hard to just quickly identify who the right partners might be to move your freight. It was great to hear Diane talk about embedded AI and predictive analytics, because one of the biggest roles I see big data and embedded AI playing is helping to remove this friction that exists, right, between the two sides finding each other. Right now, when I just think about like the number of searches that are done by a carrier on our site or by a broker or shipper on our site, that will get so much easier in the future as we start to apply AI to the data that we've already got and can make recommendations back and forth, right, between the different sides. So less about everybody trying to find each other and doing all of the clicks or keystrokes involved with that, but more about being able to log into an environment and be presented with the right load or the right carrier or the right something based on data that's already been collected on you. I think that's a huge opportunity for technology that I think so many companies in the transportation space, we're all working on different elements of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. And I love how you phrase that. It's very hard to find the right fit, right? As a shipper, being in the space, it is difficult to find that right match. So definitely understand the challenges there and appreciate that. Shelley, what about you?
Well, I definitely relate to the things Kendra was just talking about, but I'll tell you, probably the number 1, 2, and 3 item our customers are talking to us about is visibility or lack thereof. And so when you think about the challenges that are happening right now in supply chain, probably our greatest challenge is that the C-suite of every one of our customers knows what supply chain is, and there's some kind of narrative going to that C-suite as to what that is. So they might hear things like there's a driver shortage or there's a chip shortage, or what does all of that mean? So that's kind of first thing that I think about, visibility to information for them. So helping equip, this is somewhat new at the C-suite. So helping equip them with the right information, I think, is really important. Mm-hmm. The other thing I'll tell you from a visibility perspective that our shippers are saying is, and I heard this just in the last couple of weeks, Shelley, I can't tell our customer service teams if a product's going to arrive 4 weeks early or 4 weeks late. He said, I'm not looking for an exact precision on time or day. How about just give me within the week? And he meant that, from a globalization perspective. So the challenges that are happening across the board are substantial, whether that's around labor or inflation. There are definitely manufacturing issues. There are the most number of challenges ever, but I think the narrative at the top has a lot of confusion happening. I don't think that it's consistent in what we're saying. And so I think there's a lot of people confused about how to solve for the largest supply chain problems around visibility.
Yeah, absolutely true. If you think about it, often if you were in a supply chain role, 10, 15 years, you were often pushing and educating, the message out. But because of what you said, Shelley, that everyone knows supply chain or has figured out like what we all do and the importance of it, has added, now they're pulling, right? They're coming to us like, what about this? What about that? And trying to respond accordingly, very, and having that visibility so critical. So definitely understand that. Diane, what about you?
Well, we're obviously a supply chain technology company, and it's easy for us and other software vendors to think about technology as being the important thing, right? Because that's what we do. So providing visibility, data, all of that is really important. But at the end of the day, what we're really focused on, and we've sort of shifted the way we're working with our customers, is to identify what we believe are the key value drivers. In other words, if a customer says, well, great, now I have all this visibility, they might still say, but I'm not getting the value that I expected. And so what we've identified is 4 key value drivers, and our work is to deliver technology and then help the customer get business value from it, which means there's some change management involved, and we have services around that. But so we've shifted from, sure, we'll implement the software, but what we really want to do is have you tell us what your key value drivers are, how you measure them, and then we can help you move the needle on those. And so the 4 that we're focused on, we've mentioned, like customer acquisition and retention. This is about service, right? It's that question of like, somebody calls my service desk and we don't know whether to tell them it'll be here in a month or a week. That's value driver 1, acquiring and retaining customers. The second one is optimizing operational efficiency, just like moving from lots of manual work to much more efficient work. The third one is reducing transportation costs and improving working capital. And in that bucket goes things like inventory reduction. So I'm overstocking on inventory because I'm just not sure what I'm going to have. And the last one is sustainability. Those are the 4 large buckets that we really hear about. And so our focus is helping customers implement technology, but to move the needle on those. It's kind of one of the things we've learned is not enough to turn it on. You actually have to then look at what change you need to drive in your business.
Yeah, definitely. Those are very critical, and I love how we're turning that, or how you're focused on driving the value for the business. That definitely makes sense. Just a quick reminder for those that are joined as participants for this webinar, you can put any questions in the chat function. So if you have any questions throughout the session, we do have a list of questions here that I'm prepared for, but if you'd like to add any additional ones, please feel free to put that in the chat. Okay, so then the second question is, how are you managing the customer expectations given the challenges? So Diane, you touched on it a little bit when you shared the challenges, but would you say that you're focused on or expanding that in any other way from managing the customer expectation when you talk about, for instance, change management? Like that's a large undertaking. How do you kind of manage that expectation with your customers?
Well, so it has to start, in the initial sales stage. We've all bought products that, you can buy an exercise bike, but if you don't use it, you probably won't see any impact. And so what we're really trying to do is early on say to the customer, look, we can give you visibility, we can give you data. If what you care about is reducing your inventory costs, we know that there's a set of, we call them jobs, things to look out in your organization so that you can leverage this data to make a change in that KPI. So it is hard, right? Very often, you probably all know this, a customer just wants to know how your thing works, right? And so kind of talking to customers about, look, we're going to unlock visibility, we're going to unlock data. If what you want to do with that is improve customer service, then you'll now have that data, but perhaps there are other things you need to do in your business. And we've got playbooks for each of those value drivers. So it does change the conversation from my perspective, from a customer service perspective, because it's no longer purely a technical conversation. It's more of an advisory. It's both, right? It's a technical, but also getting the customer to be willing to engage with us in a way that they may not have expected to.
Yeah, absolutely. Shelley, when you talked about some of the challenges that your organization is facing, how would you say that you're managing the customer expectations given those challenges? You talked about visibility and a few other things. How are you kind of managing that expectation?
Well, Jennifer, with so many different opportunities in the supply chain, it's really causing what we would call a lot of unplanned shipments. So for us, we work closely with Truck Stop and P44 to really integrate our technologies together. So I always say, we're very focused on technology specifically through our platform, but we also know that there are people like these two organizations that are experts in their field. And so we're integrating those to make it more seamless for our customers. But I think what's important to us is we're really different. From a J.B. Hunt perspective, we are a nearly $14 billion organization that is not only asset, but also non-asset. And so we really think about our customers from an agnostic perspective. So we're really trying to think about how to create the most efficient transportation network in North America. So for us, we definitely bring the assets that we have to our customers on and purchase those for their behalf, but we also extend out to the carrier community. So our technology really allows us to think about being completely mode neutral. And when you think about a customer being only 60% compliant to what they thought they were going to give you in a bid, and maybe 40% of their shipments are moving completely different, completely separate, our ability to extend past our 24,000 drivers into the 3.5 million driver population is really important to us. So we want to be able to, when a customer says, I need help with X, we say yes. How we do it is really different, but we allow technology to really help us with that from that perspective. And then we use providers like we just talked about to help us enable that as well.
I love that, Shelley, about mode neutrality. So I will say here at Ulta Beauty, our supply chain team is focused on what we say, hashtag whatever it takes, meaning that we're going to do whatever it takes. And often in transportation, that is shifting modes, making sure the product's in the right place at the right time. And so it's wonderful to hear that behind the scenes, our carrier partners are doing the same thing, right? And are looking at opportunities just from a seamless perspective, which kind of ties into Kendra what you were saying about a little bit earlier about kind of remove that friction, right? Like how you guys are focused on that. So I guess I would ask you, Kendra, again, same question, then how are you managing the customer expectation?
Yeah, it's I love how Shelley pointed out that, she's integrated with P44 and Truck Stop, and it's something I wanted to call out as well. I think that the integrations across all of us, right, really matter for the end customer, that all of our technology can speak to each other and play off of each other in order to deliver the right outcome. It also then helps with some of the challenge I see, and what I was talking about was seamless matching is one of the biggest challenges I observe, I literally watch it in the data, is the adoption of the technology that would help remove some of the friction, right, from the matching process. And what I mean by this is watching how well our customers at Truck Stop, so carriers, brokers, and shippers, take advantage of digital freight matching, right, and the solution of being able to, instead of having to speak to each other constantly throughout the freight life cycle, but be able to communicate honestly device to device or database to database. And this is what I see actually is there's a lot more adoption happening on the broker and shipper side and way less adoption happening on the carrier side. And so a huge part of what we have to work to overcome is the technology reluctance that for us exists with some of our smaller carriers, like helping to bring them along the curve, like along this journey. adopting like use of the mobile app, and then eventually use of not just viewing a load that could be awarded online, but then actually using the platform to book that load. That type of adoption is probably one of the challenges that I see amongst our own customer base and getting us to a more frictionless experience across the board. The integrations, though, with JB Hunt and P44 certainly do help. It's almost like this collective community approach to evolving that particular part of the transportation space.
That makes sense. Would you say, so Kendra, I appreciate you sharing, the customer expectation and kind of the challenges there. Would you then, when you're faced with some of those smaller providers who are not willing to join, or maybe they did join, but to your point, the adoption of compliance isn't, at the level that you would like to see it at, or your organization would, what works? Is it education? Is it, showing like JB Hunt is on our platform and doing successful? Like how do you kind of turn that corner a little bit?
Yeah, so we're trying a number of things now in pockets. So we're truly experimenting with this. We've got a lot of data, like I mentioned, right? So all of our customers log in and do some form of searching, as well as then we've got an automated onboarding and compliance solution where we're regularly monitoring over 250,000 carriers or so. With that data, we can actually see which carriers should be matching up with which brokers, so all of that data, or shippers, and are starting to experiment with carriers who are a bit more reluctant, actually exposing where they're missing opportunities to move the load directly to those carriers and pointing them in the direction of using the function to transact digitally as opposed to transacting person to person. So it is still quite experimental. It's not something that we've done broadly yet, but this kind of like really directed recommending that we're doing is, I think it helps. It's just that it's targeted, and so I can't apply it broadly yet. So anyway, it's a work in progress. I think as I talk to some of my industry partners, like the ladies on the phone, I think we all share this struggle with how do we get our smaller carriers to make better use of the technology that we provide. I will also say, I think that with the prominence that supply chain has in the media these days, it encourages a lot more investment into the space, which then is encouraging, I think, more technology to show up. So I do think adoption will actually move quicker in the future compared to years past. At least maybe that's my hope, but I am optimistic about that.
Well, I share that hope with you. So I think that's possible. One of the questions I was going to ask this group, which was around what supply chain related initiatives do you have underway? And Kendra, you kind of talked about that a little bit already. I don't know if Shelley or Diane, you wanted to share any specific technology initiatives that you are focused on in the next 12 to 24 months.
And so I want to add on to something Kendra said, because I think
Sure.
she was on this, and I like to think about it as an ecosystem. So if we want to create a frictionless experience, then we really do have to be more connected, and no longer will each individual organization try to think about how they keep it all to themselves. I think you have to say, okay, how do we connect in a way that does remove friction? Things that Kendra was just talking about, I was like, oh, I need to connect with her because, we've solved some of those, and she's solved some that we haven't solved. And so that's, the whole idea that like somebody's going to take my business. The market is so large, so we have to get over that whole concept that there's only going to be one winner. There's going to be multiple winners in whatever part of the business that we're in. But I would say this. We really believe that people do business with people, and they do business with people they trust. If I would extend this to technology, back to what Kendra was talking about, they do business with people they trust through platforms that they trust.
Mhm.
And so the more that they can connect from a people perspective to then become a platform that they trust, the more adopted we will become. Is the more we talk about this versus talk about why I'm better than Truck Stop, or Truck Stop's better than me, or whatever those things are. Instead, talk about how do we make it better for carriers. And I'll just give you one thing to think through from that perspective. Of the 3.5 million drivers here in the US, they have 11 hours to drive. Every single day, nearly 1/3 of all of their hours are completely wasted. Every single day, all 3.5 million drivers. If we start talking about that as our solve for, guess what carriers will start doing? They'll say, wait a minute, they're really trying to solve my problem. And that's what we all have to talk about, not just me independently or Diane independently or Kendra independently. We all have to be talking about that. And so I think that's really important. We are driving our entire technology strategy from our mission statement to create the most efficient transportation network in North America. So for us, we think about commercially with people you trust, technology that empowers our internal people, it empowers the vendors we work with, it empowers also our customers. So how do we think about technology in more than just either one-to-one JB Hunt or one-to-many? That's how we have to think about it. And finally, just capacity to deliver. And so that's more how we think about, we integrate technology in the bigger picture strategy in total, but I think we share a lot more in common. And the more that we have these conversations, I think the more it changes a bigger conversation versus how will we uniquely do it and then sell to Ulta, well, we're the best one for you. You know, how do we sell that we have a better mousetrap across the industry?
Right.
Yeah, that's very well said. And I guess, Shelley, so I'm looking at the questions that came in, and this kind of ties to what you just said. And so I'm going to jump in with this one question. So one of the participants is asking about how does data hygiene impact your ability to tackle these issues, or how do you tackle bad data is kind of the question. And I was just thinking about how you just shared, you know, the fact about trusting your technology and trusting your technology platform. So how do you kind of, you know, when you have bad data, or how does that impact that, or what is your maybe cleansing compliance, like how do you kind of focus on that and to basically ensure that trust?
Yeah, well, one thing I think that's important for trust is that in our technology platform, that drivers do feel like their information is available without scrubbing. Meaning there's this whole level of mistrust in this, at least in my 28-year career. It's very difficult because there's something like 27,000 brokers and then 3.5 million trucks. The majority of trucks out there are going to be very small independent carriers, and so they're still going off of word of mouth until they find this whole think of where we're headed in society. We love this whole review culture. I want immediate access to information, but they don't want JB Hunt to review a facility, for example. They want to hear from other drivers. So what does another driver say? And so I think it's important that we don't scrub a lot of the information that is input into our platforms, because then that says we have a level of transparency. The more we scrub it and make it more monotone or cleaned up, the more they say, you know what, I think they've thrown out what becomes most important to me. So I think that's important that we share that. But we have a team underneath Stuart Scott, our CIO, that's working constantly on data and keeping it fresh and real. But I think it does come specifically for carriers. You have to think about how they make money, how they perform their work. The more information that they have to drive the 1/3 waste out of the system, the more they're going to trust the platform. And so for us, you know, we have 1.9 million reviews in our platform now. We extend all of those reviews to every carrier that's inside our platform. So they now can have access to that information, where maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, you had to go based on word of mouth. I think the more information we share and that we're open with, the better it is, up to and including price. So for so long, everybody thinks that they've got, well, I have this information nobody else has. I think a lot of it's available. We just have to be transparent in the way that we use that. I'm a little off of what your question was, but I'm hoping that's helpful, because the data inaccuracies, if you will, that's a part of what we work on from a technology space that's constantly looking for what information isn't accurate.
No, that makes sense. And I see Kendra and Diane nodding their head a lot and smiling as you were just talking about that. So Diane, do you want to comment on that, or and then I'll turn over to Kendra just too as we kind of talk about that, both questions, honestly.
Well, so, we're a data business. I mean, we're all about providing visibility. And so data accuracy, data quality is absolutely core to our value proposition, especially, when the question about supply chain related technology initiatives, there's really two big ones for us right now. And both really rely on really good data and data quality. The first is if you hear our CEO talk about it, he'll say, visibility into every truck, ship, train, rickshaw, he'll list all the modes of transportation you can think about, but the idea is that you can see that end to end and all the connections between end to end, door to door. And so that's kind of the holy grail. And if you think about the data across all those pieces, ensuring that data quality stays good from as we're looking at the different milestones and the different modes of transport. So, in addition to the technology to do that, we have an entire data quality team that does nothing but make sure that, that data is not losing any of its richness as it moves from place to place. And that, we want that sort of telephone game where it starts out as one thing and it ends as another. So that's always a sort of both a key initiative as well as sort of our mission. And then our second big focus right now is sustainability. 60% of carbon emissions come from a company's supply chain. And so we're really focused on providing data that gives people the ability to change that, right? To sort of really show, here's the impact you're having and here's what you can do to offset that. And it's a different kind of data quality, but it's still, it all comes down to data.
Yeah. Kendra, would you add anything?
Yeah, the one thing I would add is that, well, the thing about data is that I think the more we know, the more accurate the data becomes. So, for example, we are constantly in pursuit of trying to get the most accurate view of what rates, for example, look like in the spot market. And if you were to rewind like a year or two ago, we were, like many others, only relying on a couple of information sources, which was posted rates and paid rates, right? That definitely gave you a view of what rates would look like in the spot market for a particular point in time. But as we started to add more sources, so we started to diversify our sources, the data got more accurate. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not necessarily to be in pursuit of the cleanest data, but rather trying to capture as many of the sources to get the most accurate view of it is what I'm encouraging. It's, like what Shelley was saying is like, you want to be careful about scrubbing data. You want to be careful about cleaning it. And so rather than clean it, can you corroborate that data with other sources is what I'm trying to say to get the fullest, most holistic view. As I say to my teams all the time, I'm not trying to paint in one picture, it's that I want to see the most accurate picture possible. And so the diversity of sources helps with that.
Yeah, well said. Love that. Love that. Okay, next question. I'm just looking at some of the questions in the chat, but this one I wanted to touch on. So as an executive in logistics, how do you envision recruiting and or career paths will change in the next next 3 to 5 years? Obviously, a lot has changed over the last few years, but looking forward, how would you, what are your expectations, I guess, in both those areas? Anyone who wants to jump in first can.
I'll jump in because I think about this one all the time. I am so happy that supply chain got hot in 2021, like the hottest. But at the same time, I'm kind of bad because now I am competing for talent everywhere. So when I think about recruiting right now, I mentioned earlier, there's been so much investment in the supply chain tech space. That there's all these smaller companies that are popping up. And to Shelley's earlier point, it is great for our industry that there are all these different players, because we can be a more holistic community and we can play off of each other. We can work together really well. The challenge that I have in the very shortest of runs is they all want my talent too. And so now it's, you know, trying to win the war for talent in an even more competitive space. And it's got pros and cons. So what I'm describing is the cons, where it's like, oh my goodness, now my own teams are like, oh, we're not the only startup that exists now. There's other startups they can go to. But then I think one of the really good things is that we'll be able to attract talent from other tech verticals that haven't considered supply chain before. And so I'm really hopeful actually about then the new entrants that we'll bring into the transportation and overall supply chain ecosystem. But in the short run, I reserve the right to be rather irritable about for talent.
Yeah, I get it. Diane, Shelley, what about you guys?
Yeah, I share your irritability. It's kind of a good problem and a bad problem all at the same time. Definitely lots of competition for talent. You know, for us, always the hardest ones to hire are software engineers. That's just, you know, harder all the time. I'm at a session today being run by a venture firm in Boston, and they're talking about, you know, the cost of a software engineer in the last, you know, 5 to 8 years has doubled, which is kind of crazy if you think about that relative to like the rate of inflation. And so for us, it's, you know, how do you attract those people, but also, you know, any customer facing roles, you know, I always, which is my area of the business, I'm looking for this perfect blend of someone really good with technology, ideally with supply chain background, ideally with a really good UI presentation layer, and someone who's also comfortable switching between technology conversations and business conversations. And so it's a really interesting model, and unfortunately those people are rare, right? People are often really good at sort of either the technical piece or the business UI kind of piece. And so I find myself really, the pool feels smaller than it has in the past. And a lot more competitive. I think it does help quite actually. One of the things that has helped in a dark way is COVID. We're happy to hire people anywhere. They don't have to be in Chicago. They don't have to be at one of our corporate, you know, a city where we have an office, and that has really opened things up quite a lot. You know, on the other hand, kind of miss having everybody together. So, but that has meant that we can have people join us that are, you know, parents re-entering the workforce and still want to be home. For example, I've got a few people we've hired recently. They want to, you know, kids are in school, but they want to be home for when the kids come home. And so it's given us a little bit of a broader canvas.
Awesome.
Jennifer, I'll add to that just because that's been another area of focus for me over the last, you know, 18 months or so. And I will tell you, I think that people are selecting organizations that they have a complete and holistic experience of what they view important of themselves inside the work that they're doing. And so, you know, we talk a lot about inclusion and what does inclusion mean, but it really is making sure that every person feels like they can bring their whole selves to work. We are back in the office on a flexible schedule. And so for us, we do believe in community and think that that's really important. Having said that, when we want a software engineer to come sit in a cubicle, that's not really, you know, who we are or what we're going to do. And so we're thinking about how we reimagine their work. We're actually expanding here at our corporate campus, which is great for us, and that allows us to really rethink what does our tech center really need to look like based on what our people are giving us feedback on. But I think an important note that you said is, I think your question was career paths, how will they change? I think it's really important we develop those career paths. So anymore people have plenty of choices and they can go work anywhere. I always say there's always a lot more money for a lot more prestige, probably never having to work a day in your life, but the reality is, what experience can you create for an employee, which includes what their career path will be. So employees expect more, whether you've been here for 1 year or been here for 28 years. People want more, and they want to know that companies care about every aspect in life that's important in their priority list. And so that's how we're thinking about how we not only create our employee experience, but how do we recruit? And so how do we extend that people that you can trust? You know, how do you say that to a brand new college graduate? They're not going to trust us. They don't have time with us. But I do think back to that review culture that we're in, it is very available what people think about each organization. And so that's going to be even more and more important. How we treat our current employees will be the best recruiters for anyone coming to work inside J.B. Hunt. So that's where our focus is at, our current people. And then when we go and recruit, our people will back up what we say.
Yeah, I love that, Shelley, about the career path aspect that you just shared. You know, I think ultimately, you know, feeling valued, right? And I think when you talk about a career path and that focus, and individuals do feel engaged and valued and part of the community that you just shared. But trying to find that balance, which sounds like you're all on different, you know, similar but different journeys, right? I'm trying to find what is needed, is difficult and challenging and coming out of a pandemic, right? I think that's where it kind of shakes everything up. So, okay, well, I appreciate all of those, all of that additional insight. The next question is a little bit for probably some of our female participants female participants on this webinar. You know, transportation supply chain technology often has been in the past more male dominated, and I'm curious, as three strong, amazing female leaders on this panel, you know, what is kind of the secret to your success, if there is a secret, or how do you kind of manage through that and navigate through some of those challenges? Anyone who wants to jump in on that would be great. Or I'll just pick.
I'll chime in there. It's an interesting question. You know, as I've thought about it, in fact, I had an interview this morning with a woman for a senior role at P44, and she was asking about, you know, what's it like for women. And I think, you know, when I look back on what has worked for me, and it definitely was a learning to figure out how to make it work, is, and this is going to sound pretty cheesy, but just being my authentic self. I think it's easy to get sucked in trying to change yourself and your behaviors and your approaches to match other people's, and in a space where those other people are men, you know, men's. And I think that, I'm not saying you shouldn't learn from other people, but I think that, you know, you are who you are, and in all likelihood, the reason you've been successful is because of those key characteristics. And so, you know, I try to catch myself when I notice, still, even at this late stage in my career, when I notice that I'm sort of changing to fit, you know, the expected behavior, that I'm not who I really am, and I actually don't perform as well. And it's kind of pretty obvious. It's like, you know, being in a really, you know, reading from a script instead of knowing your stuff, right? And so that's been my secret as I think about it. And it's hard to maintain for sure, because it's often, you know, feels different than the other personalities in the room, but I think it's a strength.
I love that, Diane. Kendra, what about you?
I could not say it better than what Diane said on the authenticity piece. That was my initial reaction too, was that I think success, honestly, whether you're female or male, it is so dependent on being true to yourself. I don't know about others, but I've actually, across the course of my career, I've observed behaviors or things that other people will do. And I will do this thing where I try it on. Okay, see if I'm like, will that work for me? And so many times it does not work for me, which is why I know I'm actually saying that I have tried to do things that are not my norm, and so many times it doesn't work right. But then there are things, I will say, right, where I find opportunities to develop myself into a better version of myself. So there's this balance of don't try to be another person, but also look for opportunities to take your own self to its next level. And then I think the other piece I would add is, particularly in transportation or supply chain, is that I think transparency, and I mean that as honesty and just being, I don't know, real, open, direct. That I think goes a long way, because building relationships matters so much in any line of work, particularly in transportation and supply chain. And so I think alongside being authentic, being transparent and trustworthy, maybe is also what I'm trying to get to, is really important for building success.
Yeah, I love that. It sounds like you're stretching yourself, basically, Kendra, like looking at different opportunities and trying to stretch from a development perspective, but still being authentically yourself. And I think you nailed it when you talk about transparency. I know as I've shared, I've been in the industry for a while, and the partnerships I have with our carriers for 10, 15 years, it's based on a trust and integrity, transparency, directness, and I value them so much because of that. So definitely everything you just shared. Shelley, what about you? Do you have a secret to your success, or anything you'd like to share on that topic?
Well, let me say this. I think it's easy for us in the seats that we all four are in to talk about being our transparent, authentic self, which I totally agree with. But if I just backed myself up in my career, and for young women that we all spend time mentoring, they aren't able to be their transparent, authentic self because they're not in a transparent, authentic environment often. And so I think we have to recognize for our young females, if they are stepping into an area that is all male, regardless of what area that they're in, there is a norm that occurs that they have to find their way inside that. And that's in all society, whether that's here, at JB Hunt or somewhere else, you do have to recognize that. And so what I always say is you do have to find your advocate. There is someone that will voice for you, and that you immediately gravitate to, that you say, you know what, they care that my voice matters. That's who I look for, and who I looked for very young in my career, who cared about what I said, because it was often, and still is often, hard to connect when you're in a room that, the commonality might be transportation, but I might be the only female. It is difficult when they're talking about golf. And I don't like golf. I like Tiger Woods, but I don't like golf. And so I have no idea what it means to hit, par whatever. But I talk about shopping a lot, and they don't want to talk about shopping either. And so I have to find this common ground, and I'm always looking for my advocate in the room. That happens even at this level, maybe not for these, for all of you, but it definitely happens. It happens on a regular basis, and we just have to find our commonality. There is someone there that is trying to include you and pull you in, and that's immediately who I will connect to. Oftentimes I do what Diane and Kendra say. I'll talk about my family. I love my family, and I think they love their family too. So if I can get, a male counterpart to connect with me on family, because they care just as much as I do about their own. Now I've found this common ground, even when I don't feel like I've got something else. So I think it's more difficult, especially for our young women that are trying to come up in their career. They're struggling. They're trying to find it. They have male leaders. They don't know what that means, and they don't know how to do that. Having said that, I think if you are open, like Kendra and Diane said, and share that, hey, I'm really struggling, I don't know how to connect here. I have had wonderful male advocates in my career. My secret to success was listening to them. If I listen to my advocates, the people that say, don't do that, Shelley, in that meeting, it's like, what? Why? I'm trying to be my authentic, transparent, direct self. That didn't work so well. And so I'd back off from that. And so I think that's really important. And it's easy to say when I'm sitting in the seat that I'm in that I can do that today. I look back and I think it was really difficult. It's still difficult today.
I appreciate you talking about advocacy. I know that's just so critical and important for all leadership, for every level. To your point, Shelley, really important to have somebody that you could go to, that you could trust, that will advocate for you. It's also really important, and I know all three of you would say the same, but when you are growing, going up your career ladder from a career path perspective, that you have somebody advocating for you when you're not in the room as well, right? So from a career path, when we were talking about earlier, kind of your career path journey, you want somebody to be advocating for you and saying, oh, this person's a rock star because they could do this, this, and that, and really just being there as a support person. So love that. I love that you touched on that. I know we only have a few minutes, and there were several questions that were recently just put into the chat. So just so anybody knows that are the participants that are on this call, Before we wrap up with our last question, we will try to see if we can get those answers to you. We do have the participant name and the question, so if we get a chance, we'll try to circle back and appreciate some of the questions that were just recently asked. But this is the last question just to kind of close us out, which is, what advice would you give your 25-year-old self? So Shelley, you talked about younger in your career, but so what advice would you give your 25-year-old self?
Kendra said it, and I'm like, oh, why didn't I know this when I was 25? Relationships were the most important things I could have worked on when I was 25 years old.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the people that I worked very closely with then, I still work with today. And, you know, I probably didn't do everything right. And I just didn't know the same value. I always tell people, being in a company for 28 years, one of the things I love most about it is it's like being in high school for a really long time. And you kind of learn to forgive people through the process. You know, you don't come and go. And, you know, as a person that's just recently connected with a group from Northwest Arkansas, from a very eclectic group of high school friends are together now. And there's safety in that, being together. Because I'm like, we didn't all hang out together all the time, but I love being together. And that's how work is. And I didn't know that. Like when I was 25, you know, I needed to know my information and be really good at my job. And it's like, no, I need to build really great relationships. And then I still work on all those other things. I wish I had really put relationships as number one, and been my biggest focus is how I develop more relationships.
Yeah, love that. Love that. What about you, Kendra?
I think I was really impatient as a 25-year-old. So in fairness, I'm still fairly impatient today. I just did a lot better. And so I would tell myself to just, I don't know, enjoy the ride. It's almost like that impatience was all about like, I got to get to the next thing and I got to, you know, check the next box. And it was all about driving forward. And I think there's, I don't know, it's kind of like Christmas Day, where actually Christmas is more about the season than it is about the day of opening all the presents, right? It's more about like the build up to it than honestly the actual day. And I think it's might be the same in your professional pursuits as well. As there's so much learning on the journey, and it's okay to experience that and to enjoy it as it's happening, and not just be in pursuit of the next title or the next thing or the next phrase or, you know, just the next. So enjoy the ride.
That totally resonates with me. I know one of the things that I often say is I will give my 25-year-old self grace, because I had that pressure of like, I got to get to the next, or I've got to achieve this, or I've got to do this. And that just kind of messes you up a little bit. You just need to calm down and enjoy the ride and enjoy the journey. Diane, what about you? Close us out with what you would give your advice.
Yeah, I would say definitely that. It's a good point. The other thing is just to really understand that yours is not the only or best way. You know, I think when you're competing that hard, right, and you have that, like, I want to get to the next thing, you're like, you have these, so you're just moving. And I think what happens is you start narrowing what you're listening to and what you're taking into account, and differing views that are really different than yours. You're like, I don't have time to consider that. And what I've really found in the last several years of my career is, wow, I've grown so much from just being very open. And you know, you know, having someone disagree with me is an incredible opportunity, which is not what my view was early on. I viewed it as a blocker. And so I think my advice would be like, you know, you know stuff, but you don't know as much as all the other people combined. And so whether or not they're more senior than you, that you know, including other thoughts and voices and being willing to go, oh, that's a better idea than mine, or that's that I wish that I had learned that earlier.
Love that. Love that. Well, first off, I know we're at time, so I just want to say a huge thank you, Diane, Shelley, Kendra. I could have talked to you for hours. Like, I totally have loved this session. I hope all the participants have. I'm sure they have, because it's just been fabulous talking to all three of you. Really appreciate you participating in today's panel. And also just another thank you to CSCMP, and thank you to Project 44 for sponsoring this. This has been a great conversation, and I hope our paths cross again, because I really love today's conversation. So thank you all so much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.